All along the West Bank, there exist hundreds of miles of concrete wall and fence systems. This barrier, reaching 30 feet high in some places, stretches and winds through the rocky geography of Arab land. There are sections of wall which completely encircle Palestinian cities, some with populations in the tens of thousands, cutting them off from neighboring towns and resources that exist directly on the other side. Residents of the city of Qalqilya, one of the largest in the region, access nearby town of Hable through a tunnel system. What would be a 10-minute drive from one place to the other has become an underground trek from one military checkpoint to the next. Built by Israel, the wall is supposed to follow a border set by the 1949 Armistice Agreement, but the majority of it encroaches beyond the boundary that the agreement put forth. The wall has been undergoing construction since 2000, and in 2004, the International Court of Justice delivered an advisory opinion that decided the wall was illegal and called for its removal. In a move consistent with their historical approach to the conflict, Israel ignored this decision. And why wouldn't they? Throughout the history of Zionist conquest in the region, a common through line perpetuating Israel's actions has been the complete and total lack of global accountability. Notably absent, accountability from the nation with the most influence to impose any, the United States. With any consequential geopolitical pressure towards Israel virtually non-existent, protest emerges from the fallout of injustice. It would be the following year, in the wake of the International Court of Justice opinion, that Palestinian civil society would voice its call to action. The Palestinian BDS National Committee, a coalition of Palestinian unions and other civil society organizations, asks communities across the world to participate in and advocate for the boycott, divestment, and sanction of the State of Israel. International failure requires an international response, and these grassroots measures exist in response to the failure of governments and other powerful institutions. The failure to convince or force Israel to comply with humanitarian law, the failure to get Israel to respect fundamental human rights, and the failure to force the end of Israel's occupation and the oppression of the people of Palestine. Right here in town, Austin Against Apartheid has taken up that call to action and made the BDS movement local. When businesses become apartheid-free and consumers choose those locations over others, the Austin community minimizes its contribution to Israel's illegal occupation. Austin Against Apartheid unites businesses and customers in a local boycott campaign calling for freedom, justice, and equality for the people of Palestine. In their initial 2005 call to action, the Palestinian BDS National Committee makes their appeal to, quote, people of conscience, saying that, quote, people of conscience and the international community have historically shouldered the moral responsibility to fight injustice, unquote. Today, we're going to talk about what that fight looks like, where it comes from, and how Austin Against Apartheid has integrated that movement into our city. We'll also be talking with Eva from Austin Against Apartheid to talk about their history with the movement and what it looks like on the ground, as well as Sarah, a local business owner and a BDS partner. From Austin DSA, I'm Marissa, and you're listening to episode 3 of the Austin DSA Batcast. In the aftermath of World War II, the newly formed United Nations bore the responsibility of mediating a geopolitical landscape in the nuclear era. It was through this international body that states in conflict would find diplomatic resolution and maintain peace. Democracy, only moments ago under threat by fascist expansion in Europe, had broadened its scope to global proportion. The history of the organization is vast with influence that has varied in effectiveness, but ultimately the UN persists in its collective goal of international diplomacy. Problems often arise, however, when the agendas of the most powerful nations on Earth are called into question. The United States, both a founding member of the organization and a permanent member of the UN Security Council, is a frequent saboteur of UN resolutions. While not the only country to act this way, the US certainly maintains the largest influence of those that do, particularly as it relates to the State of Israel. As the first country to recognize the provisional government of the State of Israel upon its founding in 1948, the United States has protected Israel from its inception. The US also plays the single largest role of any country in aiding and abetting the atrocities committed against the Palestinian people. This kind of support comes in many forms. There's the monetary kind, as Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of US aid, with around $300 billion being given over the last 77 years. A little less than a third of that aid is of the economic variety, while the rest is dedicated entirely towards military and defense aid. This includes weapons, bombs, arms, and most notably, the continued support of Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. Israel is not a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, most commonly known as NATO, and has no formal defense pact with the US like other allies do. But the amount of money spent propping up its military poses a different kind of dynamic. For all intents and purposes, Israel acts as a proxy state for US interests in the Middle East. We'll get to that in a minute. There's also the political kind of support, where here at home in the United States, our elected leaders enact legislation at both the state and federal level that furthers the agenda of the Israeli government and the Zionist movement writ large. This is how it's been historically, and it's managed to stay that way for so long because of just how overwhelmingly bipartisan support for Israel is. Look no further than how the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, describes it. Quote, members of Congress from both parties have long recognized this partnership, that being between the US and Israel, as an indispensable asset for promoting American values and interests while enhancing our security, unquote. We've seen legislation like the Taylor Force Act from 2018 that restricted the assistance to the Palestinian Authority. There have been several federal laws enacted throughout the 2000s that codified the commitment to maintaining Israel's QME, its qualitative military edge. There are also 37 states in the US that have anti-BDS laws, which date back to the 70s, where state entities are restricted from contracting with companies that boycott Israel. Or most recently, the kind of legislation that aims to equate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, like the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act brought to the Senate in January, or Senate Bill 297, presented in Ohio's 135th legislature. These two bills have yet to pass, but this distinction is a perfect example of how repercussive the US/Israel relationship is domestically. Criticism of Israel and Zionism are not the same thing as anti-Semitism, and yet Israel is intent on having a say on the policing of American speech. The dehumanization of Jewish peoples is anti-Semitism. Opposition to and criticism towards Israel's war crimes and apartheid regime is not. Then there is, of course, the shielding of Israel from any kind of geopolitical accountability. Circling back to the UN, the United Nations has adopted more than 200 resolutions over the years, focusing on the Arab-Israeli conflict as a whole and on Israel as a state. Israel is in violation of several dozens of these resolutions, especially depending on which country you ask, with the kind of ambivalence that demonstrates just how ineffectual the UN and other intergovernmental bodies actually are here. Because despite a global consensus that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal, or that the separation barrier they've built is illegal, or that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should be arrested for war crimes, the only real enforcer is the United States. The UN is only as impactful as the sum of its parts, and the resolutions it puts forward are typically only enforced via political pressure from the General Assembly members. But when a state like Israel is so singularly dependent on the US, it doesn't need to have a bunch of allies, just one all-powerful one. The United States essentially dictates what Israel can and cannot get away with, allowing them to operate with complete impunity. When Israel starves Gazans, US support continues. When Israel bombs neighboring states like Lebanon, US support continues. When Israel kills aid workers, US support continues. Despite the primary narrative of Western media, this is not a matter of legal interpretation. It's a matter of self-interest. Having an ally of such unwavering fealty in the Middle East broadens the scope of US influence in a region that is both economically and politically prudent to US interests. Israel serves as a military foothold in the region, allowing them to address regional threats like Iran from a distance with little commitment of any United States personnel. In the same vein, Israel provides massive amounts of intelligence to the US, especially as it pertains to regional nuclear development and terrorist groups. Israel is a major component in the cycle of weapons and oil that flows through the Middle East and is connected to the entire globe. The United States military-industrial complex reaps immense benefit by keeping the region unstable, on edge, and reliant on US weapons manufacturers. In 1985, the US and Israel signed their first free trade agreement, establishing a major trading partner and emboldening Israel's economy. Companies like Google, Microsoft, Intel, and Apple all have operations throughout Israel. The economic relationship between the two countries is a collaborative one, on par with and even surpassing that of other major US allies. It becomes clear quite quickly why attempts to address Israel's recklessness by the UN, International Court of Justice, or International Criminal Court are so futile. If you're going to tell Israel what to do, then you're telling the United States what to do, and nobody is allowed to do that. That is, unless you're Israel. And when you put all of this together, the coddling by US leadership, the unconditional aid, the international protection, you get the unhindered enabling of a rogue nation state committing genocide. The Gaza Strip extends along the shores of the historic Mediterranean Sea. Integral to the country's identity, the sea is a staple of Palestinian life. It's a backdrop for morning coffee. It's where fish are caught so they can be sold. It is an evening bath for a child. Every day, taxi drivers transport Gazans to and from work, music practice, art shows, shops, and family gatherings, each passenger with a story of their own. From Gaza City to the southern border of Rafah, a population of over 2 million people live in a space more densely packed than cities like Boston or Chicago. The food they consume, the water they drink, the electricity they use is all extraterritorially controlled by Israel. They cannot leave and they cannot enter except through Israeli military checkpoints. In essence, Gazans exist within the borders of the largest open-air prison on the planet. To the northeast lies the West Bank, an area consisting of hundreds of interconnected farms, towns, and cities. Palestinian families are born and raised here, living on land passed down through generations. There are major universities, mosques, churches, and neighborhoods all throughout the region that are central to Palestinian day-to-day life. For almost a century, Israel has, in the name of Zionism's self-proclaimed right to a Jewish state, expanded its territory in the West Bank. Upon founding in 1948, Israel immediately began their mass displacement campaign, removing around 80% of the population from what is now Israel, killing thousands of Palestinians in the process. Kicked off their land with nowhere to go, a Palestinian family who merely a week ago lived as peacefully as life would allow are now refugees. The Nakba, as it's known, was a foundational event in the history of Israeli conquest over Palestine. Today, 700,000 Israeli settlers live in 250 settlements in contravention of international law throughout the West Bank. This is all, of course, not just illegal, but an ongoing denial of humanity. Life for Palestinians in the West Bank is one of constant surveillance, anxiety, restriction, desperation, and humiliation. Even something as simple as movement throughout their daily life is severely restricted. Many Palestinian children are forced to go through multiple military checkpoints and face harassment as they traverse Israeli colonies just to get to school. Access to work or access to hospitals have all become labyrinthine treks that get worse over time. Settlements are home to military raids and acts of violence from occupiers who bulldoze homes and arrest those in the way. Al Jazeera has shed light on the lives of landowners like Sheikh Saeed, who grows olives with his family in the southern herding hamlet of Al Raqiz, and is regularly met with harassment campaigns from armed Israeli settlers. In one instance, the settlers are confronted and stand down, but not without video recording Saeed and his child, calling them Hamas fighters before leaving with, quote, "You are a Nazi, may God erase your name," unquote. Then there's Huda Awad, an elderly Palestinian woman who sleeps in a cave with her daughter after the frequency of settlers stealing their sheep and beating them at night had increased. As Huda is interviewed, she reminisces on decades past, where there were no settlers and there was no army. In the last 2 years alone, nearly 1,000 Palestinians have died in the occupied West Bank. 212 of them have been children. To get a firsthand account of what the situation on the ground is like, our guest Eva, member of Austin DSA's Austin Against Apartheid campaign, traveled to the West Bank in May of this year as part of a travel seminar with Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Eva is also a founding member of seminary student organization Seminarians for a Freed Palestine. Thank you for joining us, Eva.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the basics. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and what motivated you to make this journey to the West Bank?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think like many Americans and Westerners throughout the world, I grew up with a lot of internalized Zionism. And so there was a lot of propaganda I was receiving about Israel that I took for granted. But in the past couple of years, I've received more education around Palestine. And leading into 2023, I was becoming aware of what the situation was, that there was occupation, that there was apartheid. And I was also entering seminary in the fall of 2023. And I had heard that there were previous trips to the Holy Land that had been led by faculty and staff or guest leaders um, who had more Zionist leanings. And I had begun to speak with administration and staff about, was it possible to have a trip where we heard more Palestinian and Muslim voices on the trip. And uh, and there were people who listened to that. And I heard that there was a trip that was going to be led by a professor who specialized in opposing Christian Zionism. And when I heard that that trip was going to be happening for this past summer, I just immediately knew that I needed to go.
That's amazing. That's good to know that there's been like progress in the like program itself in like unlearning Zionism.
Yeah, and that's something that our seminary is still navigating together as well, is that there's different levels of learning and unlearning around that, and we're trying to be in conversation with each other about it.
Amazing. So your trip in the West Bank, what was your experience like traveling throughout the West Bank, and how did it differ from the experiences of your local comrades?
Yeah, so our trip was done in part in collaboration with Bethlehem Bible College. They have a 2-week intensive on peacemaking that we joined as part of our travel seminar. And so we stayed primarily in Bethlehem, but then each day traveled to a different city in the West Bank, Jerusalem, Jericho, Hebron, Nablus are some. And just were with Palestinian tour guides going to both like religious and cultural sites and also speaking to them about their experience living there. And because of safety concerns, we didn't leave the West Bank. We weren't able to enter Gaza, for example. And so a lot of what I witnessed and heard about was more the experience of occupation and apartheid than witnessing explicit genocide. Um, and overall, in terms of how it compares to the experience of my local comrades, I noted that in some ways I didn't get a ton of new information that I didn't know about, but it was the difference between knowing something intellectually and knowing something firsthand, knowing something experientially.
Yeah, definitely. Could you tell us a little bit about those local comrades, the people that you met there, and what they had to share about their experiences?
Yeah. Um, I especially want to talk about an experience I had meeting a Palestinian family. Certainly, also a huge theme of our trip and our experience was the hospitality that we received from the local people. As soon as we arrived in the region, uh, we were in the car after having been on a flight for 30 hours, and my professor asked, like, hey, could we briefly stop to get coffee? Like, I know it's not on our route. And then just our taxi driver uh, went to a local place where he knew the people there, and he got us tea and like fresh made naan. And it and like that was totally like the thesis for every other like hospitable experience that we had. And so another one we had was with a family, and we got to go to church with them in the morning and then have lunch with them. And while we were eating together, they told us about their experiences growing up and living in Bethlehem. And specifically, the mother in the family was who I spoke to the most. And she talked about as a child being woken up in the middle of the night uh, by her parents who were telling her that the IDF was raiding their home, and that this would happen frequently, and that her responsibility that was given to her as a child was to hide books and flags, books either written by Palestinian authors or, interestingly, science books, um, and that they didn't want Palestinians to be gathering that knowledge. And her parents were very clear with her that if she wasn't able to hide them, that it was possible that their lives might be at risk, that they might die.
Wow.
And yeah.
That's a lot to process as a child.
Yes, that was what I was feeling with when I was with her, is that she's had to hold this burden ever since she was really, really young.
Mhm.
And another example of that was that uh, along with the idea of like the Palestinians not being allowed to have certain books, access to certain knowledge. There was a period of time when she was a kid where the schools were shut down. And they technically weren't allowed to go to school, but they started to go to school in secret at teachers' homes. But because they had to do it in secret, initially, like something that the parents did to kind of hide the reality from the children was that they would make like them sneaking to their teachers' homes a game, and they would like have them like hide while like an Israeli tank was passing by on the street. And then as soon as it passed by, they'd go quickly, quickly, like go to the teacher's house, and they'd run to the teacher's house. And in a way, she talked about like how initially it was fun, um, but that she ultimately had to come to terms with what was actually happening and why that was necessary. And unfortunately, part of that was that a close family friend, one of her uncle's best friends, um, was like in the midst of one of those games, he was shot. That he was shot through the heart, point blank, using an automatic rifle, simply because he had put his hand on a soldier's shoulder.
My God, it's horrible.
Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier about like schools just suddenly being shut down for a while. It reminds me of just like so much of what we're covering in the episode today, of just like the hindrance of basic everyday like things that would take, you know, just a little bit of time are made incredibly complicated, inaccessible. Like earlier we talk about getting from the town of Calcalia to the neighboring town of Hable, a mile away. Um, People have to access it through a tunnel system because it takes like hours to get there through the checkpoints. Um, but yeah, it just really underscores how every single little thing that you do is met with some sort of um, like hindrance or barrier, or like you just said, unbelievable violence.
Yeah, the violence is horrible to process, and it absolutely is true that these like things that we take for granted in our American life are not for granted in the lives of Palestinians. And that particularly also like freedom of movement, it was a huge thing. I think if there were things that surprised me on the trip, um, and we could talk more about that. But one of those things was like just how much like freedom of movement is prohibited. Um, and I also know that like another thing that y'all are talking about in the episode is like lack of accountability. And I think like that was a huge thing that I witnessed as well. Because another day we got to visit Ida refugee camp in Bethlehem, and the camps like start as refugee camps, and now because it's been going on so long that these people have been displaced from their homes, that they just become neighborhoods,
Mm.
and infrastructure is built up around the camps. And but because it's still technically a refugee camp, there's a UN humanitarian aid office right outside the entrance to the camp. But then a couple blocks down the street is like an IDF training camp.
Mm.
And they have a memorial outside the UN office, uh, for a young boy who was playing on that street and was shot, uh, by IDF from like a sniper tower, down the street. and was shot right outside of the UN office. And nothing was done to prosecute on behalf of this child's death. And it seemed like there was no reason for, like, there was nothing he was doing to provoke the IDF. He was just playing in the street.
Jesus.
I also know a lot of what I'm sharing. I in some ways forgot how heavy some of the information that was shared with me really is. And so I think I'm also remembering as I'm talking to you, like how horrible this information is, particularly when it is like visceral and proximate to us, that it's not just I'm hearing about this random person, it's somebody that I met and talked to and had a meal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that completely changes. Like you said earlier, you have the knowledge and then you have the like firsthand experience knowledge, and it completely changes it contextually. Assuming you had a decent understanding of the material realities within the West Bank before your trip, was there anything that took you by surprise during your experience?
Yeah, I know I've spoken a little bit about some of the surprises that I had, but I know another one that I want to talk about with you all is that uh, something that I felt while I was there was that about 3 days in to the trip, I had a profoundly visceral felt sense of needing to flee, that I needed to leave and get back home, that I didn't feel safe, even though I knew that I had a lot more safety and a lot more privilege than my Palestinian comrades. And so, uh, and I think that that's notable for me to think about as someone who was traveling there, visiting the region, and could return to a home where I could experience relative safety and freedom, and that this is something that Palestinians are experiencing every day in their own neighborhoods, in their own homes, that they know that they're at risk all the time.
Yeah, I was just listening to an interview of the Global Samud Flotilla, um,
Mm,
flotilles, however you would describe them, and their experience being intercepted and kidnapped. Um, and with the like American flotilla members, they talked about just like how America actually wasn't like coming to save them in that moment. They were like the last ones left.
mm.
And the fact that they were like treated as terrorists as well for trying to bring aid. Um, it's just like, yeah, showing that breakdown of the actual safety of like anyone who cares about the Palestinian people, um, is, yeah, like I said, breaking down. And yeah, there's no safety for the Palestinian people, no safety for those trying to help them, as we see aid workers and anyone trying to enter the region to assist. Um, yeah, there's just there's no protections anymore. And it's a complete fraction of what Palestinians are experiencing day in and day out.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that something that it's evoking for me is that I think that sometimes people's difficulty processing what's going on in Palestine and engaging um, how that might be calling them to action is that in order to recognize the imperialism that's part of the occupation in Palestine, you have to then start to dismantle the imperialism in our own country. That a lot of the rhetoric that's being used to justify what Israel as an ethno-state is doing has also been used to justify American actions, US like foreign policy. And so it's difficult to have to accept that maybe your own country is complicit in something that you think is wrong. but I think it's an important thing for us to think about as we think about what do we want our country to be doing? What do we want our money to be going to? Um, and that for me personally, I don't want my tax dollars to be going to funding genocide.
Talking about Americans' role in the movement for a free Palestine. You traveled to the West Bank as part of a travel seminar at your seminary, and you're also a member of the student org Seminaries for a Free Palestine. As someone studying to become a pastor, what do you think the role of faith leaders and organizations, specifically Christian ones, is in the movement for a free Palestine?
I think that particularly Christian leaders have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with Palestine and to critique and condemn Christian Zionism. From my vantage point, Christian Zionism is a continuation of Christianity aligning itself with Western colonialism and imperialism. And that by siding with, and that by siding with an ethno-state, Christian Zionists are siding with power, white supremacy, and militarism. And also, Christian Zionists claim to be Jewish allies, but their theology is fundamentally anti-Semitic. If people aren't familiar with it, there is this idea that in order for Jesus to come again at the second coming, that the Jewish people have to all return to the Holy Land and either convert to Christianity or be killed. And that's not what I want for my Jewish siblings. I want my Jewish siblings to be able to live wherever and be safe and free to be themselves and practice their religion and honor their tradition. And I want us to be in solidarity with each other. And so I'm opposed to Christian Zionism also because it's, to me, very clearly contrary to the gospel. That if you look at the example of who Jesus was and what he was doing, he was a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew, himself living under military occupation. That he preached a theology that prioritized the poor and the marginalized. He critiqued religious hypocrisy that valued doctrine and rules over the lived experience of the most systemically oppressed. He was arrested, taken hostage, tortured, and ultimately executed by a colonial state. So to me, the Christian story fundamentally sparks empathy, if not solidarity, with the Palestinian cause.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. In the face of all these atrocities that we've discussed so far, are there any like stories of resilience perhaps that you encountered that like inspire your advocacy, keep people going, keep Palestinians going?
Yeah, absolutely. On the same day that we visited Ida refugee camp, we got to visit the Al Rawad Cultural and Arts Society. And this is a nonprofit organization that has sprung out of the Ida community where people are thinking intentionally about processing generational trauma and looking to do that through visual and performing arts. And so they have a variety of programs there for children in particular to process what they're experiencing through theater and visual art and photography. And they also have a really beautiful and colorful library that prioritizes Palestinian authors. When I say colorful, I'm just thinking about they had like a bunch of paper mache crafts like hanging all over the room. And it was a joy to see children in there inhabiting that space. And equally in the camp, uh, there also is a jewelry store, and I'm wearing some of their jewelry today. Um, and they take um, the canisters of gas bombs that have been thrown into the camp, and they take the metal and they use it to create jewelry. And I think that that like is also such a metaphor for how they're taking this suffering and they're doing what they can to still persevere and create life and create beauty in their lives.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that anecdote. Finally, what are the insights you ultimately took away from your time in the West Bank, and how have they impacted your advocacy going forward?
Yeah. What comes to mind is that each time that I met with someone in the region and spoke with them at length, I made a point to ask, what is it that we as Americans can do to support you, to be in solidarity with you when we return to the US? And over again, the answer was to testify truthfully to what's happening, to testify honestly and transparently to what we were witnessing, that we were witnessing in person, but that all of us are witnessing on our screens. And and to also talk about the normal people, to talk about the normal people that are there and to humanize those people. I also heard over and over again people concerned about being viewed as terrorists, being concerned that people were apathetic to their plight because there was this idea that perhaps they deserved it. And so, as much as possible, I do want to testify to what is happening over there. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak about that. And when we first returned, I also was a part of a report back where we talked about our experiences. And in my work with my student org, Seminarians for a Free Palestine, our work right now looks like just making Palestine unavoidable.
Amazing. Yeah, I love what you said about the fact that so many of the victims of, well, essentially all of the victims of this occupation and violence are just regular people trying to live normal lives. Um, they want to get to school, they want to get to the neighboring town to go to work. Um, they want to like raise their children in a place without war. And yeah, just hindrances everywhere they try to go. Um, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think it's going to be really edifying for listeners.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Yes, of course. And thank you for just giving us an overall more detailed look of what it looks like on the ground. And your experiences there. It was very insightful.
Yeah, thank you.
In Gaza, the catastrophe is amplified tenfold. Established after the conclusion of the Arab-Israeli War in 1948, Gaza instantly became a home for fleeing Palestinians during the Nakba. For a while, Israel occupied Gaza too, and didn't fully withdraw and dismantle settlements until 2005. Still, Israel has a complete military blockade on almost the entire Strip, with Egypt enforcing a blockade on their own border to Gaza's south. Today, Gaza is experiencing the worst act of human aggression since the Holocaust. In the aftermath of October 7th, Israel amped up its pre-existing indiscriminate bombing campaign to new levels, and has been relentlessly airstriking the Strip for 2 years now. These attacks have left Gaza City, Rafah, and other areas of the Strip under total rubble and devastation. Right now, 80% of all the structures in Gaza City are completely destroyed. Israel is bombing hospitals and critical humanitarian infrastructure. They're striking innocuous refugee camps, IDF soldiers are shooting and killing Palestinians receiving aid. Israel has killed journalists, aid workers, women, and children in numbers that we may never truly know the total of. Worse yet, Israel has induced a famine upon the Gaza Strip with their stranglehold on how much food and water can enter. This isn't even particularly new, as Israel began what they called the Gaza Diet in 2007, placing the Strip on an intentional caloric restriction. Beyond letting food in at all, Israel has razed almost all of Gaza's fertile land, meaning they cannot even grow food themselves. They have gone so far as to no longer allow baby formula into Gaza. In an interview with the Majority Report, Dr. Tarek Loubani, a Canadian emergency room physician currently stationed in Gaza, sheds light on just how dire this crisis is. Children are the most affected by this famine, and, quote, almost every patient is starving, unquote. He tells the story of a father entering the hospital with his 8-month-old daughter in his arms, asking for help. By the time she was presented to Dr. Loubani, she was already dead. Gazans are dying every single day from starvation, from thirst, from disease, and from violence at the hands of the Israeli government and their allies. The Gaza Health Ministry's death toll since October 7th sits at around 65,000, but these typically only include deaths from traumatic injury. Not to mention, you can only count the bodies that you can see. Organizations who have worked on counting genocide death tolls in Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo estimate the Gaza death toll to be almost 5 times higher, putting a total loss of life in the range of 300,000 people. That's almost 14% of the population of Gaza from October 2023. What the world has been witness to over the last 2 years is an egregious, unfathomable tragedy, perpetuated by a nation that has free rein to inflict as much carnage as possible. One mother, filmed and interviewed in the documentary Gaza, bemoans the world her children live in. Quote, I wonder if it was fair of me to give birth to them here, unquote. In the middle of September, a United Nations Commission of Inquiry officially stated for the first time that Israel is committing a genocide. It seems apparent to just about everybody but the US. In all of this, one thing is clear. These are not two sides fighting an equal battle. This is not one country exerting a vague notion of a right to defend itself, or a national security matter, or a country attempting to tamper aggression. This is a matter of a colonizer and those being colonized, an oppressor and those who are being oppressed. Israel does not want peace. They do not want Gaza to rebuild. They do not want a two-state solution. With the United States holding their hand, Israel hopes to eradicate every vestige of Palestinian existence. For far too many, the sand of the Mediterranean shores will never feel the same again. From the beginning, the history of Zionist conquest in what was once Palestine has been wrought with violence. Through it all, the Palestinian people have continued their pursuit of a better tomorrow, a reality so dire that for many it simply means surviving one day to the next. There is a perseverance here whose strength reverberates across the globe, galvanizing communities from all walks of life to fight injustice the best they can. Decades and decades of failed international intervention and peacemaking have forced the issue into the hands of people willing to work to make the change themselves. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement for Palestine was born out of this circumstance. BDS has found partners in unions, academia, faith organizations, and grassroots movements around the world in a showcase of mass solidarity. This is not a new idea, but one that takes after similar movements before it, adopting the strategies and rhetoric that have helped successfully liberate oppressed people throughout history. Collective action is the collective answer, and that collective is growing. So what exactly does this look like in practice? Boycotting is a multifaceted project that isn't just about withdrawing support for Israel. It encompasses the withdrawal of support from all Israeli institutions and companies complicit with these war crimes. Executing a boycott like this could look like the sportswear brand Puma, who announced in December 2023 that it would not renew its contract with the Israeli Football Association, which was ending at the end of 2024. Where boycotting takes on the consumer side, divestment tackles the money itself. This means urging banks, local councils, churches, pension funds, and universities to withdraw investments from the State of Israel and all Israeli and international companies that sustain Israeli apartheid. The University of Michigan Faculty Senate Assembly, for instance, voted to divest from any company invested in Israel's genocide. Sanctions then take the protest to a policy level where it is imperative that governments fulfill their legal obligations. Israel must feel pressure from their international allies, by means of ending aid or assistance to the maintenance of the country. Pressure like what the Canadian Parliament did when they voted to end arms exports to Israel in March of 2024. It doesn't stop there, though. States should ban businesses with illegal Israeli settlements, end military trade and free trade agreements, as well as suspend Israel's membership in international forums such as the UN bodies and FIFA. This would all be impossible without a unified front, disciplined in their efforts to adequately pressure complicit parties. What these efforts look like has changed throughout history, with every new BDS initiative drawing inspiration from the successes of those that came before it. One of the most prominent and successful BDS movements, from which the Palestinian civil society drew inspiration from, was in response to apartheid in South Africa. British and Dutch colonists had subjugated Africans and other populations of color for centuries, and in 1948, apartheid became official policy. It was through these means that the National Party of South Africa executed an agenda that allocated land to whites, forced Black workers in white areas to carry passes, and exacerbated inequities in systems like healthcare and education. Anti-apartheid activist and South African politician Albert John Luthuli puts it succinctly, quote, "I would like to tell you what apartheid means to us. It means that instead of our children being educated, they are indoctrinated. Believe it or not, it means that by law, our people cannot aspire to do any work other than ordinary manual labor. What apartheid means is a long tale of suffering. In a word, it means the denial of dignity and of ordinary human rights." Unquote. Marginalized groups met these policies with protest in the form of strikes, boycotts, and armed struggle right from the start. The late 50s and early 60s would see a rise in boycott appeal as South African exiles and British supporters coalesced around the idea of boycotting products made by companies that supported the apartheid government, launching the appeal in June of 1959 on South Africa Freedom Day. March of the following year would become Boycott Month. With the backing of the Liberal and Labour parties, along with the Trade Union Congress, Boycott Month would become the largest anti-apartheid protest until the 1980s. Rallies were held with attendance nearing the 10,000 mark. Local councils and student unions banned products like South African fruit and cigarettes from their premises. Leaflets on the boycott were handed out to grocery shoppers across the country, and activists sent flurries of letters to the press. This momentum would take a violent turn, however, on the 21st of that same month when South African police killed 69 unarmed protesters in the township of Sharpeville. The massacre sparked international outrage and expanded the scope of the movement. It became clear that the boycott of South African goods was not enough. There needed to be a complete and total isolation of apartheid South Africa, and unwavering support of liberation movements in the country. It had to become something bigger, and in the decades that followed, international pressure on South Africa grew. There were arms embargoes, oil embargoes, sports boycotts, and economic sanctions. Most consequentially, the freeing of Nelson Mandela and support for the African National Congress opposition party became catalysts for the eventual unbanning of the ANC and renegotiation of the country's constitution in the early 1990s. By 1994, Nelson Mandela would be elected president of South Africa in their first ever free election. Out of the embers of grassroots boycotts came a firestorm of international action. It was not quick, it was not easy, but it had to start somewhere. The transformation of the boycott movement during this period is a great example of what makes BDS so effective. This method of protest has the malleability to evolve as environments change and urgency grows in order to sustain momentum over long periods of time. Even now, versions of BDS are still finding ways to strategically alter their efforts, aiming to protest as effectively as possible. Today, Gallup polling shows approval for Israel's military action in Gaza is at an all-time low, and sympathy for the Palestinian cause is at an all-time high. By funneling that momentum through active leftist channels, BDS can help fortify organization efforts and increase exposure to the Palestinian struggle. This is best exemplified in the No Appetite for Apartheid campaign, launched by the Palestine Solidarity Working Group in 2022. No Appetite for Apartheid looked to the Delano grape boycotts of the 1960s and saw two groups: the National Farm Workers Association and the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, execute their own successful pressure campaign. The two orgs would go on to strike against grape growers in Delano, California, where a strike alone would prove to be inadequate. As young organizations, the National Farm Workers Association and Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee lacked capacity. They were new, easily replaceable, and in need of solutions. They would find answers by looking outward, building a coalition made up of more than just farm workers with the intent to boycott grape growers who did not use union labor. National Farm Workers Association and Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee would eventually merge to become United Farm Workers and begin to organize alongside the civil rights movement. Finding allies outside their own picket line increased exposure to the United Farm Workers' cause, garnering support from a base of volunteers and organizers that would have never been privy to their fight otherwise. The United Farm Workers' fight went national as activists all over the country sought to pressure retailers and persuade consumers to buy and sell Union grapes. From 1967 to 1969, U.S. grape sales dropped between 30% and 40%, as an estimated 14 million people would boycott non-union growers. Then, by 1970, the major grape growers in the area had all negotiated and signed contracts with the United Farm Workers. Aptly named No Appetite for Apartheid follows this example by, quote, targeting the Israeli food industry as well as other food-related companies complicit in the Zionist project, unquote. One component of No Appetite for Apartheid is the calculated choice to focus their efforts on battles they know they have a chance to win. There are benefits to high-profile protests that galvanize large groups against prodigious institutions or entities. But these fights are often fraught. As enthusiasm dissipates, so do organization efforts. No Appetite for Apartheid takes a middle-out approach, working with local businesses directly to drop brands on the boycott list. In addition to this, they work in tandem with the unions and workers to provide leverage over stores that would otherwise be unreachable to No Appetite for Apartheid. As more businesses sign on to the pledge, the growing base of support remains engaged. Education on Palestinian liberation then finds itself a community of people who are currently politically active. This connection enhances solidarity and adds another element of advocacy to pre-existing coalitions. By focusing their efforts in these areas, No Appetite for Apartheid uses BDS as a springboard to both educate and engage while compounding the momentum their successes create. The Palestinian civil society made their initial call to action to people all over the world because that is the kind of bandwidth required to make a change. Whether it's apartheid South Africa, local grape boycotts, or mass genocide, there's no better possibility for a better future unless action is taken by a determined collective. We mentioned earlier that the United Nations is really only as strong as the sum of its parts. In a lot of ways, BDS campaigns work the same. But where the UN is wholly disempowered when one of those parts overrules the rest, BDS's most integral feature is the solidarity maintained between each front. The efforts of these individual pieces often go unnoticed amidst the broader scope of progress, but they highlight just what makes collective action so special. Gaza is roughly 7,000 miles away from Texas. Still, the state manages to remain actively complicit in Israeli war crimes by housing 2 weapons manufacturers who provide arms to Israel. $14 million from Austin residents alone are sent to Israel via federal taxes each year. If this kind of liability is possible despite the distance, there's no reason local activism can't have the same reach. Taking the principles and practices of everything we've talked about and applying them to the city, Austinites can do their part to make change right where they live. These are the small things that make up the larger whole. Austin Against Apartheid takes after No Appetite for Apartheid in their targeted boycott efforts to strategically focus on a small number of companies and products for maximum impact. Where customers play their role in abstaining from purchasing the products, businesses are asked to become apartheid-free zones by refusing to sell or use targeted products from the start. This dynamic is a great demonstration of the compounding effects BDS campaigns have as a form of protest. In addition to the refusal to buy, sell, and use targeted products, Austin Against Apartheid asks businesses to publicly declare themselves apartheid-free. This can look different depending on the business, and Austin Against Apartheid provides the material to do so. It could be a sign on the front of the store or assets for a business's online presence, like digital logos. As the coalition builds, so does education and exposure. Accomplishing campaign goals stems from this growth as Austin Against Apartheid strives to make the issue of Palestine unavoidable in the day-to-day lives of Austinites. With each new commitment from a patron or a vendor, Austin Against Apartheid fosters community and support around the struggle for Palestinian liberation. To better understand what it looks like to be apartheid-free, we're joined by Sarah, an Austin Against Apartheid campaign member and co-founder of A Better Force. Her agency offers leadership training with a decolonial lens and is an apartheid-free business. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Can you start by telling us a bit about your business, A Better Force, and what led to your decision to become apartheid-free?
Sure. A Better Force is an equity-focused leadership and training company. We host workshops, lead classes, and coaching sessions, as well as consult with businesses to improve their workplace practices. It was started by my sister and I And we essentially wanted to bring our unique voices as first generation Asian and Muslim immigrants to the leadership space in Central Texas. And our mission is to create more inclusive and welcoming workspaces for marginalized communities and to help them thrive in their professional lives. One of the big reasons we started our company was that we felt like leadership programs often focused too much on the individual and put all the onus of workplace issues on the individual and ignored systemic issues. And we kind of wanted to change that in the leadership space. But yeah, hit us up if you have workplace training needs or are trying to implement initiatives in your company and need support with that.
Amazing. Thank you. And between you and your sister, what did y'all discuss in your decision to become apartheid free? Like what led to that?
Yeah, I think it was a really easy decision for us because we are really vocal about speaking up for Palestine, and we have been doing so especially since the genocide started in October 2023. So we try to practice being compliant with BDS in our personal lives. So it was really a very easy decision. I think it only took us like a few minutes to decide to go ahead with that. And it's because the Austin Against Apartheid movement is just very aligned with our values and what we practice in our business.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Can you walk us through like some of the specifics of what it looks like to be BDS compliant within your business practice?
Sure. One of the main things for us as a service-oriented business is to boycott future purchases from companies that are priority targets for BDS and for Austin Against Apartheid. And these could be things like companies like Dell, HP, Intel. And I know that when people hear these names, these big names, it can sound really intimidating at first, given how widely used they are. But honestly, once you start researching alternatives, you see a lot of cool options out there. And often smaller companies have more unique and customized features that can be really helpful. So as an example, let's say that you use HP printers for your office, but you need to you need to buy additional printers in the future. One of the alternatives we found was a company called Brother. They have great printers, are super user-friendly, and they are available at big retailers like Best Buy. One of the other tips that was really helpful to us was that if we're researching an alternative and we're not sure if they're BDS compliant, we checked the Boycat app or their website, which is an official BDS partner. And one of the really neat things about them is that you can scan barcodes or search brands by name to see if they have ties with Israel. And the reason why this is particularly helpful is that even though the big priority targets are really visible, often they have a lot of subsidiary companies that they do business with. So it sometimes isn't obvious if they're a priority target or not. So those types of apps like Boycat really helped us see those links. But one other thing that's helpful for businesses to know if they're trying to become BDS compliant is that anything that they're already using, that's already purchased, you can keep using them until like they reach end of life, because you're not financially contributing to BDS by using something that's already purchased. So I know that was a question I had when we signed on. So I did want to mention that.
Cool, amazing. That's so cool that I hadn't heard of the boycott app before. That's amazing.
Yeah, Boycat. Yeah.
Boycat. That's great that that exists. Because yeah, like you said, it can be so confusing to like know exactly if a company is in some way through a subsidiary associated with Israel. Um, Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Next question. Do you have any advice for business owners who want to sign the pledge and become apartheid free, but may be hesitant to make a public-facing political declaration?
Yeah, I think the fear is real given that there is a very organized movement to harass folks who speak up for Palestine. But know that whatever we have the potential to face is nothing compared to the horrors that people in Gaza and the rest of Palestine are going through. Um, for us as a business, even before my business signed on to the pledge, we were posting about and doing advocacy for Gaza. And I won't lie, we did lose some clients because of how vocal we were. But at the same time, we gained new ones who loved and respected that we didn't shy away from the truth. And these types of clients really align with our values and will be more likely to stick with us in the future. So we have no regrets because there is nothing more important to us than standing up for human rights and against genocide and apartheid. It also helps us to know that the more of us that are speaking up, the less risk to any individual one of us, because there would simply be too many of us for any one individual to be a target. We're essentially only at risk for as long as we continue to be in the minority. So I feel like as business owners, it's really important for us to lead by example in our communities. The other thing that might be helpful for businesses who are considering signing on to know is that I guess case studies from past businesses who have faced harassment. Um, so there's the example of Zucchini Kill, a pledged business, a bakery in Central Austin, and they got hate from Zionists due to their support of BDS and Palestine. They were review bombed and sent hateful messages after a Zionist influencer posted about them on Twitter. But thankfully, their own community, the Austin Against Apartheid campaign, and Austin DSA folks came together to support them, such as by reporting the troll reviews, showing up in solidarity at their shop. And after a while, the Zionist trolls gave up, and I think Zucchini Kill gained new customers who only heard about them due to the support and advocacy after they were getting review bombed. And they gained new loyal customers who are really thankful for their support of BDS and the AAA campaign. So my point in sharing this story is that, yeah, you might get some hate from people who aren't aligned with your values, but you will get just as much love, if not more, from people who respect you for standing up for what's right. And arguably, having those values aligned clients is even more crucial.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, basically, like if everyone was speaking up, right? There's just the volume is too much for them to target any one of us individually. But yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And last question for you. After becoming apartheid free, what are other ways that pledges can get involved with Austin Against Apartheid or the movement for free Palestine as a whole?
Yeah, in Austin, one of the helpful things to do is follow Austin Against Apartheid and Austin for Palestine Coalition on social media and their newsletters so that you can stay up to date on actions they are taking in the community and show up to support or volunteer with them. But one of the most impactful things that you can do as a business owner is educate others in your community to follow your example and become apartheid free as well. Because people may be hesitant to sign on or not know exactly what signing on entails. But hearing about the personal experiences of other business owners can really reduce that barrier immensely and ultimately encourage them to sign on as well. I think not nearly enough people understand how horrific things are in Gaza and about the injustices the Palestinian people have gone through in the last 77 years. And I say that because if they really understood the depth of the horrors, I think more people would feel comfortable about speaking up. And as an activated member of the community, a business leader's voice matters more than they think, and it can really have a powerful impact when they speak up. So I definitely encourage them to use it. Finally, I also really recommend continuing to learn about Palestine and learning from Palestinian voices, because the more educated you are on the matter, the easier it will be to educate others and counter misinformation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us and giving us some more insight on what it looks like to be apartheid free. That was very informative.
Thank you for inviting me and for hosting this episode.
Of course. Thank you so much. Whether it's facilitating political education or tabling at in-person political and cultural events, building a broad network of community members mobilizes Austin. Affiliates like Austin for Palestine Coalition work closely with Austin Against Apartheid in local advocacy efforts, mimicking the outreach strategy applied during the Delano Grape boycotts. Austin for Palestine Coalition is a network of over a dozen organizations, each with a different set of goals and missions, all united by a common cause. The initiative put forth by Austin for Palestine Coalition rely on the collective work of these orgs to drive Austin's anti-apartheid strategy. South by Southwest 2024 does not drop their defense sponsorships or raise their artists' pay without the combined work of the Austin for Palestine Coalition and the United Missions and Allied Workers making it happen. The last 6 years have seen Austin become a major hub for defense weapon technology that's being used brazenly in the slaughter of Palestinian lives. Capital Factory is an Austin-based technologies company that hosts a number of defense companies, including Raytheon, compromising the city. The South by Southwest boycott is indicative of what's possible, and Austin for Palestine Coalition's Cancel Capital Factory campaign continues that fight. The battles here in Austin even have international implications. Aboard the recently intercepted Global Samud Flotilla, a fleet of civilian-led ships carrying aid to Gaza, was Austin resident and Army veteran Greg Stoker, along with hundreds of activists aboard more than 40 boats. The Israeli Defense Ministry labeled the participants as terrorists, blocked their attempts to provide aid, and arrested them. While detained, Stoker described the Israeli prisons as, quote, kind of what you'd expect from a terror gulag, unquote. Along with harassment and physical abuse, there were, quote, basically no showers, unquote, and food was intentionally scarce. He goes on to say, quote, a lot of people are on hunger strike and protest to them withholding insulin from some of our detainees, and we were told there are no doctors for animals, unquote. Stoker is home in Austin now, a far cry from where he was only a few days earlier. The flotilla may have been deterred, but it punctuated Israel's continued violation of international law in front of the whole world. Whether it's down the street or across the globe, Austin has the ability to invoke change when we coalesce behind a cause. While the Austin for Palestine coalition works, Austin Against Apartheid is working. All while Jewish Voices for Peace Austin is working, and etc. This is the process in motion. As we've seen, Austin Against Apartheid is just one of many boycott efforts within No Appetite for Apartheid, which itself is just one BDS campaign among thousands of others. These are the means by which Austin plays a crucial role in applying the exponential pressure needed to be successful. So where are we now, and what can we do? Every day, someone new is hearing for the first time about what Austin is doing in the fight for justice. BDS's track record of success has been the result of a concerted effort by people of conscience throughout history. Join Austin DSA and get involved with like-minded people putting their best foot forward. Sign up for the Austin Against Apartheid and Austin for Palestine Coalition newsletters to stay up to date on the latest news and initiatives regarding their campaigns. If you own a business, become an apartheid-free zone through Austin Against Apartheid. Tell those you may know who own businesses about it. Taking action comes in many forms, all of which serve to make a difference. At the time of recording, the Israeli government and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire. The ceasefire is a multi-phase plan with outcomes that remain uncertain, but it has allowed Gazans to experience even the slightest modicum of relief. Respite from unrelenting bombing is progress. It is important to remember that a ceasefire is only part of a larger goal towards Palestinian liberation. The ceasefire's response to the mounting international pressure Israel faces with each passing day, and that pressure must not waver as each phase of the ceasefire is executed. For the moment, Palestinians can breathe, but they are not yet free. Until then, we will continue to work towards a just future.